Hi there. Today we've got something a bit different for you on the Working Class History podcast. We are very excited to be launching new online projects, an interactive web app and map containing all of our historical stories. You can check out the web app at stories.workingclasshistory.com and the map at map.workingclasshistory.com, linked in the show notes. We gave a preview of the apps to our friend Pearson at the excellent Coffee with Comrades podcast, and we had a good chat with them about it. Coffee with Comrades then produced this podcast episode about the project. So after the jump, you can listen to this podcast in its entirety. And if you enjoy it, make sure to check out the Coffee with Comrades podcast wherever you get your podcasts or on their website, coffeewithcomrades.com, and you can support them on Patreon at patreon.com/coffeewithcomrades. Links in the show notes.
Alla mattina, appena alzata, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao alla mattina.
Before we get started, just a quick reminder that our podcast is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Our supporters fund our work and in return get exclusive early access to ad-free podcast episodes, bonus episodes, free and discounted merch and other content. For example, our Patreon supporters have access to an exclusive bonus episode where we chat with Pearson about their experience using the map during a recent trip to London. Join us or find out more at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Link in the show notes. Hope you enjoy this episode and our new web apps.
This week I am sitting down with Matt and John, two of the intrepid fellas behind Working Class History. What's new, y'all?
Yeah, hanging out, playing Nintendo, that sort of thing.
What have you been playing?
No, actually I haven't. I can't wait for the day that actually like my kids get old enough for me to play computer games and call it quality time.
Hell yeah.
But for now I've got to do like responsible stuff, like feed them and that kind of stuff.
That's generally pretty important.
It's bad. They need so much food. Crazy.
Hell yeah. How are you, John?
Yeah, good. It's great to be back. I can't believe it's been 3 years since we spoke last.
Yeah.
I don't suppose anything major has happened since then, right?
No, I mean, not, world historic uprisings, a global pandemic, Elon Musk buying Twitter, a number of fucking other things. No, nothing important in any way, shape, or form has transpired in that time. But it's good to see you again, nonetheless.
Yeah, definitely. Always good to talk with you and Coffee with Comrades.
Yeah, for sure. So, listen, for folks who may not have heard of y'all's project before, what is Working Class History and its mission generally?
Working Class History is an online project basically aimed at researching and promoting people's history and our collective history of struggles for a better world, in short. And we have various outlets to do that: social media, a podcast, books, and as we discussed with you last time, now soon to be an interactive web app.
Hell yeah. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Matt?
No, not really. To be honest, I don't know. Yeah, I suppose the main thing would be like the general approach that we kind of are concerned with is not big names, that people, they kind of usually take up the space in the history books, but often people who just like disappear from, have almost disappeared from the historical records entirely, and kind of focusing on movements from below rather than kind of the kind of politicking of, high-ranking politicians or, whatever, monarchs. And there's the thing of like, in like history classes in the UK, there's like rhymes so that you can remember all the names of the kings and queens in history. And like, I've never been able to memorize that. I think maybe part of that is what's made me, my inability to succeed at mainstream history is what's made me go in.
I'm just going to rewrite history.
Yeah, fuck that. Yeah, kings and queens, not interesting. It's history from below. And luckily, because of our focus on people, who usually are forgotten, and, the kind of nameless sort of people in history, it also means I don't have to remember too many names.
Hell yeah, it's a bit of both worlds. The thing that's always appealed to me about working class history is that y'all don't just like pay lip service to the rejection of, the great man of history kind of mythos, but really like dig deep and are really intentional about trying to look beyond just like Western history and take a kind of global approach, which kind of guides us really neatly into this new project that y'all have been working on behind the scenes. And John, if memory serves, I feel like you and I had a conversation about last time we spoke that this was something like earlier in the works, but now y'all are prepared to officially sort of unveil it to the world, which is the Working Class History Map. So could y'all tell me a little bit about this new project and why it's so exciting and kind of what went into it?
Yeah, we did discuss it last time because it was something that we were working on. We've probably been working on this for about 5 years. Wow. Developing it behind the scenes, doing the research and the mapping. And only relatively recently have we been able to build the platforms for it. So essentially, the web app has two sides. There's the Stories app and the map. And what they are essentially is that ever since we started, we've been building an archive of stories about people's history. And we use those to post on social media every day on our Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, blah, blah, blah accounts. And we included them in the book that we discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And what these new platforms do is put all of that private archive of ours online in a way that everyone can look at, people can browse, both by topic and tag, things like country, union, person, name, and also by the map, so geographically. So at the moment, the Stories app has about 3,000 and something of our people's history stories in it. And for a large number of those, we've been able to find often very specific geographical locations related to those stories. And so those stories which we've geographically mapped are also browsable on our map. Yeah, so we're very excited to launch this. As I say, it's been something we've been working on for a really long time behind the scenes, but we didn't have the technical know-how to be able to build a platform for it. We had ideas for it, but we couldn't bring that into being. But we've been very fortunate, thanks to support from our readers and listeners on Patreon, that gave us a kind of financial basis to be able to fund this work. And we partnered with the Yalla Web Development Co-op, and we also crowdfunded a bit of money for this from our readers and listeners to fund the development of the Stories app. And the companion map was developed very kindly with a fantastic, amazing volunteer who got, a couple of different people volunteered to help, and we went through a couple of iterations of the map. But the recent incarnation of the map was also in particular developed by a really fantastic volunteer who put in a huge amount of work, Will Field. So we'd like to extend massive thanks for that assistance, without whom, it wouldn't have been possible. And yeah, we're really happy to be able to share it with everyone and make our history available in an easy way for people to look at, that's not owned by Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, which is the problem with the social media platforms.
Totally, yeah. And it's really like one of the things that's really immediately interesting about it is that not only does it have that autonomy and sort of infrastructure that's separate from this billionaire class that's on social media, but it's also like the first time that all of it's just readily available, right? So like you can just browse things freely, because in the past, right, with working class history, you either have like your book where you can flip through it and get some daily ideas, or the social media posts which give you daily kind of flashbacks of history, on this day in history sort of style posts. But like what this allows you to do is not only read all of the stories in your catalog that you've compiled throughout the many years that working class history has been alive and well. But now you can also look at it on a map and see where all this stuff is. And it's a really cool, really interactive piece of software that y'all have put together. And I'm really excited for people to dig their teeth into it. Matt, can you talk a little bit about the app and how it figures into the digital physical experience of like actually like getting to kind of navigate places and spaces in working class history?
Yeah, like, I mean, I think it's a kind of, I sometimes wonder if it's just like me and my own way of thinking about things, or how I like to, I like maps is a really sort of a basic thing about me.
Maps are cool.
They are cool. Like, and I want, so I don't know if I'm going to start like making like grand generalizations. I don't know if that's like, it's applicable to everyone else, but I want to speak as if it is. But I do just think there is something really nice about being able to visualize all of these events. I mean, in a kind of grand, if we think about kind of our movements in terms of like workers' movements and things like that, and, resistance and all that stuff, there's something quite amazing already in seeing such a vast geographical spread, which seems to itself, it seems to me, it kind of suggests something kind of transnational, transhistorical kind of, I think that itself kind of suggests something profound. But I think kind of there is something also about, when you zoom in and you like, if you're from a place or if you're visiting a place and, you can see the events that have taken place there. And especially, I don't know if maybe John wants to talk about it a little bit, but also the idea of like, walking through these areas, sort of hitting these points as you walk is also a kind of it's an interesting feeling, and so I was just thinking about, John, I don't know if you remember when we did the interview for the Grunwick episode, which was the first episode we ever did as a podcast. We went to meet up in this, this union office in northwest London, which was just down the road from where the Grunwick strike had happened. And, then afterwards, we were walking up to a pub, and on the way we passed the bus garage where in 1918 there'd been a wildcat strike of women bus workers for equal pay. And then on top of that, you could see on the bus garage itself, why there were so many women workers at the bus garage, and it said there was a plaque there dedicated to all the bus workers there who died during the First World War. So you're already kind of feeling this history as a kind of like a geographical or spatially located kind of event in a way that maybe, just as words on a page, it can feel a bit kind of ephemeral. I don't know, like if that's the right word. And then anyway, I remember, so as we kind of got closer to the pub, further up the road from that, there's like a massive row of what it is, huge kind of building. It's called Rutland Park Mansions, and it's real kind of luxury. Look, now it's like luxury accommodation, but in the sort of late 80s and early 90s, it was actually a huge squatted building of 42 4-bedroom flats, I think, all squatted and sort of then lived in, and all of that kind of stuff by people not paying and all of that. And that got evicted in 93 or something like that. And I just think there's something there about like, this short walk, and it's just these sort of 3 huge historical events that have all taken place, really right next to each other. And there's something about that I think is really sort of powerful. I don't know, like it's I don't know if John, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add.
I'm also someone who loves maps, and I agree. We really want this to be something whereby I think through our social media platforms, people can interact with our kind of history and our history of struggle by date. But we think that the map is a good way that people can interact with it and feel part of it and connected to it geographically. So we want it to be something so that people can connect with the history of their local area where they live, or when traveling, to be able to visit places and connect with stuff that's happened in the area that they've gone to that they might not otherwise be aware of. And we hope that these stories on the map will be able to act as kind of permanent digital historical markers, or blue plaques as they are in in the UK for a lot of events and people that will never get an official historical marker or a blue plaque for various reasons. But yeah, we hope that it will have those functions.
You know, especially like urban development and things like that, that actually like, you know, now it's the thing about the Grunwick strike, the factory doesn't exist anymore. It's now been developed into something else. I don't know if it's flats or something else like that. And well, to be honest, as is the case in London, everything that was something else has now probably been developed into flats. That's the way kind of London is going. And so, but there's just there are so many locations of really kind of significant historical importance, but for various reasons, like John says, we'll never get a kind of a historical plaque to remember it, because maybe the histories that they commemorate are still kind of unresolved or a bit raw, you know, in ways that, you know, they can't kind of be
they can't be easily palatably like appropriated by the state to like be turned
exactly
into
absolutely exactly, you know, like, you know, and I'm thinking like in the 80s there was the Wapping printers dispute in East London, when basically Rupert Murdoch basically decided to smash the printers union, and the area where a lot of the picketing happened, which was known as Fortress Wapping, because there was so many police around it, and the place just became kind of locked down by the state basically, and you had like trade unionists and their supporters kind of fighting with police and scabs and all of that. And when I was looking for that location on the map, kind of I could get to the area, and then all of a sudden I realized that the area that it is, or where it was, is now, I don't know if they finished it, but it was a building site basically for an absolutely huge new kind of residential like, apartment block. And again, that thing that, you know, I wonder, will that apartment block ever have a blue plaque on it to say, oh well, here, this was where the printers unions were smashed, you know what I mean? That's at real risk of being lost. So I guess that's kind of what we're trying to grab. Doing working class history really makes me feel that history and our connection to history is really fragile. You know what I mean? Like the connections to the past are constantly kind of being lost. And so we're constantly scrabbling to kind of put it down as historical record. And I think there's this quote from it was an art critic, a Marxist art critic called John Berger, and he wrote this novel called G. So he's talking about all history being kind of contemporary history, in that in being history, it has to vibrate in the mind of the historian. And I think the map for me is kind of a way of making history vibrate in people's minds, if you see what I mean. I don't know if that...
No, totally.
I think that's a really nice thought. And also, I just think it's worth, as an addendum to that, saying that, and it's not just that history kind of evaporates or something like that, but also there are very conscious efforts to stamp it out and delete it, you know, as you can see, and particularly in like US schools at the moment, with what is totally manufactured furore over what they call critical race theory, but they actually mean history.
Right. Or like erasing people whose gender identity is somehow transgressive to the polar spectrum. I can't find the right words. The
colonial gender.
Yes,
the
exactly.
Colonial gender binary.
Yes, thank you. The binary. Why I couldn't find that word for some reason. Oh man, talking for a living is
all right. On the way home just now, I couldn't find the word for umbrella, so don't worry about it. It's all good. But it's funny the mentioning of colonialism as well, because that's one thing. You know, you get people who especially like, you know, with British colonialism, people will talk about, oh well, you know, we were like, oh, we ended slavery, or we did this, or we did that. We weren't that bad, and da, da, da. Oh, and often they accuse people who kind of want to bring up, you know, for instance, like the people who toppled the Colston statue in Bristol, and they say, oh, these people want to rewrite history. And all this is forgetting things like the British state just destroyed thousands of documents that they were like, well, these are some of the more egregious and embarrassing colonial crimes, so we're just going to burn them or like dump them in the sea, and, you know, that sort of thing. And you ever mention this sort of stuff to people? It's like, well, people who, you know, are very concerned with maintaining history through the monuments to slave owners, they disappear. They're not interested in talking about that aspect of destroying history, which I think is telling.
It's very telling, for sure. For sure. So tell me, there are a lot of online maps that are dedicated to people's history, to radical history. What is it that makes the working class history map different?
Yeah, well, as Matt said, the Matt loves maps, I love maps. And I think at the moment, like, maps are quite trendy and have been kind of for a few years. So I think a lot of people have been trying to, create maps of things, which is great. And there are a lot of maps out there which have a lot of great information in them. But we think ours is very qualitatively different from a lot of others. So, for example, there's a really fantastic set of maps and data by the University of Washington about the industrial workers of the World Union. And they've got maps about all kinds of stuff. They've got maps of IWW strikes, locals, and that sort of thing in the US. And they're useful in the way that if someone's a researcher and they want to get an idea of what the geographical spread was of the IWW and its activity, they're kind of useful.
A lot of the markers are kind of generally in this area, you know what I mean? So they'll be like, oh, there was a strike in this town, and so there'll be a marker on that town. Right. Rather than, okay, on this street.
Really granular, like on this particular corner, this particular street.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, like, I think that's one thing that's kind of really important to us, is the kind of getting down to sort of, exactly that kind of granular level. Partly because I think, especially, I think if you come from a big city, certainly you experience your big city through your local area. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So the idea of saying like, oh, there was a strike in New York, and just being like, well, Bronx, Queens, whatever, like, right. You know what I mean? Yeah, Yonkers or what, like, I don't know. So I kind of think like that's kind of why it's important to us that, like, people can kind of experience the map through the locality and kind of have that connection from the global all the way down to the local. I think is kind of really important.
Totally. It's really powerful.
And again, having that thing, like, like what I was saying about, walking through an area and that, you can kind of connect these various historical events and see kind of, I suppose that one of the threads in a lot of them, you say, oh, well, that's flats now and that's flats. So like how, right. The kind of the industrial past has kind of been like reworked into a
gentrification.
Post-industrial gentrified present. Like, on the flip side of that, I think an interesting thing is that a lot of the maps that maybe were more specific were all sort of, local ones and like, sort of city-based ones, which again, I think is fantastic. I do think is really good for people to be mapping, their local areas and mapping their city. And there's been some really great maps that I've found, or like some like books of walking tours. There's a really good Vancouver labor history walking tour book that we drew upon for a lot of the points in Vancouver. But so to kind of reverse what I was saying before, another nice thing from my perspective is being able to go from the local and then zoom back out onto a global level. And I think the idea, not with this initial version, but we're hoping further down the line to be able to have the map kind of searchable by topic, or by, you could like restrict it by particular years, for example. And I think that's kind of nice, especially, for those of us who come from a kind of internationalist sort of, bent. We are obviously interested in the local, but also how it spans out into a more kind of global perspective. And so I feel like I've spoken for a really long time now.
Good.
But this is actually like a real problem for me in my life generally. Like, and like my partner is always having a go at me, saying that like I'm gonna end up like, those old guys who like stop, young people and like tell them like, oh, well, in my day, we use it, and that's 100% gonna be me. While they're kind of looking at their watches and right, all right, old man. Was one more thing about kind of the local maps that I did want to mention, is that from researching things, I've found that loads of the local maps, the real issue is that they often just disappear. there's been a couple of times where like I've gone on to a local workers' history, labor history website, and there's lots of interesting information. And then they say, "Oh, check out our map," and then it's the map is no longer working.
Yeah,
and it some of them are sort of by like local union federations or things like that. I think there might be something. I think there was a thing about the code base getting out of date or something like that. And it just disappeared. Like,
yeah, they didn't pay for the website or whatever, like renew it.
Yeah, and also a lot of them are based on kind of commercial mapping-based platforms, and then the platforms close down or change, and then all the data is gone.
Right.
So that's something which will be different with our project, because obviously on one level we built our own map, but it's based on open source software, and also our data is in such a format that it can be used. The data can be downloaded and shared and used in any other kind of platform as well,
right,
in the future. So
awesome.
The danger of data being lost won't be an issue for us.
That's awesome. I didn't realize it was open source. That's really cool.
There was with one of the maps. Well, there's one that really kind of broke my heart, which was a thing is called the like Radical Tyneside map, or mapping Radical Tyneside, or something like that. It was mapping a radical history of Newcastle in the northeast of England, and it was an excellent map. Oh, and it was done through a university. Actually, it was a university. I guess they'd gotten a research grant or something like that. But then I guess maybe the people researching it had moved on to another research project,
right?
And just left it. And I don't know, some code seems to have broken or something like that, and it's all just gone. And I've tried to email people who were involved in it, people who contributed to it, and I've had no responses. And there was so much really good information just about that area, and by people who, they must have spent hours.
Oh, for sure.
Of just their research, and they found they found a location as they were doing their archival research, put it together, put it on a map, and now it's just gone. And it's so that one really hurt me, that one.
Yeah. Well, it's cool to hear that y'all have taken steps to try and prevent that from happening to your map, and have kind of built-in fail-safes to ensure that doesn't happen, which is really fucking cool. I wanted to ask you, if we can maybe break this down a little bit, right? Because, listeners have probably been, hearing us talk about this, and, obviously I'll include links to everything in the show notes so you can interact with it yourselves. But I wondered if, maybe we can kind of take it down to like an actual practical example, because it's kind of hard to talk about this very physical, tactile sort of experience on a podcast, because it's intended to be, in your conception of it, right? It's intended to be this tangible physical experience where you're walking around and experiencing stuff on the ground level. So I was thinking, actually John was thinking, and we talked about it. I'm stealing John's idea, but I was thinking that, it might be interesting to look at a couple of things that have like occurred close to me historically, right? And the first one, the one that makes most sense, is I was born and raised in Orlando, Florida, which is right next to Sanford. And Sanford, of course, is where Trayvon Martin was murdered. And it's one of the kind of not starting, but one of the real big flare-ups of Black Lives Matter happened in Florida, specifically in Sanford. And so if you zoom in on the state of Florida, you'll see a couple of different dots on there as of right now. But one of them that pops up is just north of Orlando in Sanford, and it pulls up like not only like a little bit of the history, like a little blurb, but it also pulls up some pictures. It pulls up some exact locations here. It shows you exactly where like the killing occurred. It's like really, really granular down to like the kind of most precise details, which I thought is like, it's really fucking cool to have that experience, to be like, oh, I lived there. I took part in some of those uprisings. And like was a member of like some of the people who were like organizations that were contributing to like doing mutual aid in those areas. And so it's really cool to like get to see that on a map. It's a weird kind of experience, and I wanted to kind of talk about that with y'all a little bit.
Yeah, well, where possible, we've tried to get as exact as possible with the location. So some of them are down to the nearest meter or so for some things where it's possible. Obviously, for some events, that's not possible. But what we've tried to make clear on the map is we've got a legend and text that describes exactly how the event relates to the location, because a lot of other maps have dots for a location, but when you read it, it's not clear exactly how the story relates to the exact location, if you see what I mean. So we've tried to be very specific about that. So if a strike happened in a building, we say this is the building where the strike happened, or maybe there was a picket line outside the building. So this is the street where the picket line was, that kind of thing. So you really understand how, if you're in the place, or if you're not there, you can go to it on Google Street View or something like that and think how, what was happening in this space at this time, and how does what is there now relate to this event. And yeah, so we wanted to be really specific about that, because that was something that was missing from, I think missing from every map that we looked at beforehand. That it's that information about how exactly the location is related to the event was missing. So we've tried to be really clear on that to give people a real kind of understanding of what it was. And obviously for some events where it wasn't possible to mark down exact location, we've put, near this spot or somewhere on this street or in this park is where the thing happened, something like that. Or for some kind of very small towns and villages, it might be in this village.
Since I last looked at the at the archive on the map, I see that y'all have added something in Indianapolis, which is where close to where I live now, and it's right next to the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, which I've been to a million times, and it's like a huge like rallying point for like protests and stuff in the city. But there's an Indianapolis streetcar strike on the 31st of October, 1913, which is very auspicious because that was 110 years ago, 2 days ago, which is fucking wild. And yeah, apparently over 2,000 National Guards were brought into the city. You have a picture of it and everything. It's so this is so fucking cool. I love this project so much. I wanted to ask you about some of the more mapped cities. As I understand it, you've like really closely mapped Barcelona, New York, and London. And I'm curious what that process was like and how those events in history became blitz on a map. And I guess also like, is part of the vision of this to give people the opportunity to kind of like, re-walk their streets in a different way and be like, this thing happened here, this thing happened here, this thing happened here. There's just like a lot of really interesting like and emergent possibilities that I'm curious what y'all have kind of envisioned for people to kind of how you want them to experience with or interact with this map and this app that you've created.
Yeah, so when we launched this map, we wanted to make sure there was a really diverse spread of information in it. So there's stories about at least every country, sovereign territory, and overseas dependency on Earth and every US state and things like that. But some places there's not that much information about. But we really wanted to give people an idea of how powerful it could be by making a particular focus on a few cities. So we chose London, New York, and Barcelona, where we made sure to add lots of stuff. Also, they are populous cities and one that lots of people travel to. So we thought that would be a good way for people traveling, as well as people who live there, but to be able to do kind of like a different kind of sightseeing. Mm-hmm. Whereas instead of going to Buckingham Palace, you can be like, oh, this is the pub where a bunch of striking workers got in a fight with a scab, or that sort of thing. I mean, to be honest, the thing that first gave me the idea for the map and how it might work was actually is tangentially related to Hillary Clinton.
Really interesting.
Who in a masterpiece of cringe saying Pokemon Go to the polls, which, is real like
Tear your hair out.
Fingers on a chalkboard, painful moment in world cringe history. And it wasn't that specifically, but it was like Pokemon, Pokemon Go. Lots of people were looking at this stuff on their phones and going to these weird little dingy alleyways and public toilets and whatever, because there was a Goofenflager, or whatever. I mean, that would be if Pokemon was German, maybe. But, because there's some kind of little monster there or something, and
Gotta catch them all.
exactly. And thought, well, what if we could do that, but with communism?
That's sick.
And so in these cities, New York, Barcelona, London, we hope that people can use them to go around and look at things like that instead. Because also some of the locations, a bit like Pokemon Go, a lot of the locations that people will end up seeing from this map, they're not beautiful buildings or grand monuments or something. Often they're quite grotty little old industrial sites,
right,
that have been abandoned or what have you. So a bit like the old Pokemon Go things where it would be a very different way of experiencing a city. But there's also some quite nice things on it. Like, I know you're going to Barcelona soon, and so Barcelona, one of the locations on the map that's one of my favorites is the old Ritz Hotel there. During the Spanish Civil War and Revolution, the Ritz was collectivized by its workers, and they renamed it like Gastronomico No. 1, and they turned it into a communal kitchen to feed working class people and their families. And that hotel is still there. It's not called the Ritz anymore. It's called the Hotel Palace. But yeah, you can go stay there.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
But budget provided, of course.
One of the things that I actually really like is this thing of like, you go to like these sort of unassuming, the sort of sense. I guess maybe that's the project as a whole, this idea of like the unassuming, the forgotten, the kind of, and actually, these places were locations where these really kind of important things kind of happen. What I do think is also really interesting with some of the cities is there's you can kind of also, I mean, again, what we touched on about gentrification, is that there's one site on the map in West London on Goulburn Road, which is kind of near Notting Hill and Portobello and all of that kind of area, which now is, it's really fancy. I can't remember what's there now. I think maybe it's like a really fancy like barber or fancy hairdresser or something like that. But, in the 70s or 80s, it was the bookshop, the squatted bookshop of the Black Liberation Front. And that, I think, is really interesting from a perspective of like, as the working class and got kind of squeezed out of the centre of London, actually what ends up happening is that, well, maybe not right the centre, but, certainly the sort of inner kind of London, a lot of these important sites in working class history, they've now been completely kind of taken over by these sort of monuments to kind of contemporary gentrification, which I think is a kind of a mad thing. Like if you go to the Woolwich Arsenal, the old Woolwich Arsenal in southeast London, which was used to be a huge factory where all the weapons and things were made for the British Army, and it was a really key site in the during the shop stewards movement around the First World War in London, that is. And now it's all luxury flats, and like you can find a studio flat there for like like $500,000. It's really it's just crazy. Like it's unbelievable. Like and it's just kind of amazing to think that that's what's happened to these old sites of working class history, that they're just kind of being bulldozed and replaced with luxury flats, which is it's sort of quite mad. But yeah.
One thing I would like to say specifically about the mapping of these cities, New York, Barcelona in particular, is that a lot of the events in Barcelona were mapped for us by a great historian called Catherine, who is also involved in giving Civil War tours of Barcelona,
Oh,
which
shit.
are really fantastic walking tours. And also there's a book by...
You're going to have to put me in touch with this person so that I can go on the tour.
So a lot of the events added were in a book by Nick Lloyd, who also does these Civil War tours. So a lot of these events are on the map now, but also if you're looking at the map, you can see there's a link to book this tour and go on the tour to be taken round it by someone that, you know, that knows the history and can answer questions and that sort of thing. So, you know, we're very grateful to Catherine and the Civil War tours for that. And we hope that definitely you should go on their tour. It's fantastic.
I will. Sounds dope.
And also in New York, for example, a lot of the events there are a lot from our archive and from just doing things like reading a lot of old copies of the New York Times about old strikes in Manhattan by Jewish furriers and all kinds of things like that. But also there's a lot of stories which are from a specific book by Bruce Caton of a radical walking tour of New York City, which has lots of great information in it about locations. And the sources are listed in the Stories app. And there's also links to purchase the book. So for any of these stories on the map, there's a link for people to learn more, which then takes you to the Stories app. And at the bottom, it includes all the sources, links to more information. So, for example, about the walking tours in Barcelona or to get Bruce Caton's book.
Yeah, we've mentioned that kind of London, Barcelona, and New York are kind of done in quite a lot of detail. But I think I'd say Paris, Vancouver, and Leeds in Northern England. I think these are also cities that have been done quite, maybe not as detailed, but you know, definitely quite detailed. And with the Leeds one, I was in touch with people at the archives at the local council who they helped a lot with. Because they produced a local map, which at times wasn't very accurate, and I had to kind of quiz them a little bit more about kind of where exactly they kind of meant. But they had a what was it called? I think it was a power and protest walk for the centre of Leeds. That was really good, really useful. And yeah, Vancouver, I think I touched on this Vancouver Labour history pamphlet, which we found that was excellent. And the Paris one, we sort of collaborated with like a Parisian comrade who helped us called Marion. She was really helpful in finding lots of locations, because I think one thing that really limits, you know, what we're able to do and find is just, you know, language barriers.
Sure.
Like it's like my French doesn't go very much beyond just sort of discothèque and oué, I don't know, jambon, I don't know, which as you can see is not great. As soon as I started speaking French, I was like, I've regretted going down this path, but here we are. So that's that.
Hell yeah, that's awesome. Well, you know, as I'm sure you don't need me to tell you, geography and radical politics both enjoy a really rich history, and there's a lot of really critical overlap between those two subjects. And I think that, you know, literalizing that space and reclaiming its history really strikes me as a central facet of this project. We talked a little bit earlier about how reactionaries in the U.S. are particularly targeting education, but there's also been a lot of conversation about like statues of settler colonialists and right-wing despots and other, you know, various shitheads taking up public space. And, you know, thanks to the dedicated work of brave and militant people, those statues have often been pulled down and removed. And I'm curious if y'all see the Working Class History Map and app as, you know, part of this tradition of liberating and reclaiming space and giving the left a place that they can see its own reflection in the real world.
Definitely, yes. And it's funny you mentioned that as well, because, for example, Matt earlier mentioned Edward Colston, an enslaver who literally enslaved, I from recollection, I believe it was over 100,000 people.
Jesus.
That he had abducted from West Africa and enslaved. He is, there was a statue of him in Bristol. There's lots of stuff named after him in Bristol. Less now than there was, but, because he there is, up until recently, has generally been commemorated as a great philanthropist, which might be something like, commemorating Fred West as like a dedicated physician. No, not Fred West. What's his name?
Joseph Mengele.
No. Yeah, we're still memorializing Joseph Mengele as a dedicated physician and, father of however many. But one of the spots we have in our map is the old location of the Colston statue, which was toppled and thrown in the harbour.
Hell yeah.
Which actually I'm sort of upset about, because I kind of think we should change it to the location where it was thrown into the river.
Like in the river.
because you can see where it is. You can see like from photos, it's really kind of clear. So yeah, I think that would be great to put in. But yeah, we discussed that.
Yeah, I think we will do that. I think it would be good to have both, the kind of before and after.
You could do like an Edward Colston like walking tour from the old plinth to just where it was chucked.
Walking slash swimming. I recall when it happened, someone did update Google Maps with the new location of it in the bottom of Bristol Harbour. But it's funny because the right wing idiots that talk about, oh, you're trying to rewrite history or erase history, and it's like, no, like for hundreds of years, or people have been rewriting the history by talking about building statues to this great philanthropist. That's the rewriting of history,
right?
Or ignoring history. Whereas the people that picked him up and threw him in the river are people who are actually aware of his actual history, not the whitewashed nonsense that passes for how people were commemorating him generally. So
I also think that kind of like history is it's a dynamic kind of thing, isn't it? It's not like just history is is just a statue, and a statue that's how you learn about history, is that, oh, and if we haven't got a statue to someone, then how, it's like, let's build a statue to Hitler because I want to learn about Hitler, you know what I mean?
Right.
All the statues about all the various, like, oh yeah, exactly, I would like to learn about various kind of, or in fact the entire kind of true crime podcast genre would have to be scrapped in place of just building statues of just famous serial killers, right? And like, so the people who dumped him in the river were the ones who were like really correcting the historical record.
Totally.
And by acting in history, they were engaging with and making it at the same time, which I think is really kind of amazing. Where like what John was saying, having this philanthropist, the big statue to a philanthropist, and then just kind of sleight of hand, just for slave owning, but that's where, just tuck that out of sight. That's hiding history completely.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, well said. Well, gentlemen, as we close, I wanted to ask you both about the future of this project. Where do you see it going in the weeks and months and years ahead? Is there ever going to be like an option for people to submit their own historical markers to the app and map? Because I think that would be fucking sick, because decentralizing this as much as possible, I think, could make it even more well populated, and I'm curious if y'all had any plans for implementing that kind of a feature in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I think something we want to get across is that we've been working on this for a really long time. The concept for 6 years and the practicalities of it, like at least 5, but we really wanted to get something out there that works. So this is a kind of initial version.
Proof of concept, if you will.
Yeah, that functions and people can use. In future, there's lots of ways we want to improve it. Like, for example, the Stories app, you can navigate by, there's an index where you can navigate by topic, by, organization name, by country, that sort of thing. And it contains timelines, but the map, we want to be able to do that to the map as well, so that you can filter it to specific topics or people, and also filter by year and that sort of thing. So those are plans for improving it in that sense, which will roll out when we're able to. And yes, we definitely, this is something which it's too big a thing for us to do by ourselves. We really want to work with particularly other kind of researchers, historians, local people's history groups, and that sort of thing. We've reached out to several groups already. I think an issue with a lot of radical history groups is that they're all overworked and have, too much to do, too little time. So we'll see what we can do there. And also we definitely want to roll out ways for people to contribute their own data, but while at the same time being able to verify its accuracy. Mm-hmm. So that is something that we're definitely going to be considering, and we're definitely going to be looking at how we can do that, because that is definitely the plan, as well as probably in the intermediate term, getting data contributions from specific individuals, historians and groups, and then later opening it up to more public submission when we can have a proper kind of fact-checking verification process, and stopping spam and things like that, stopping. That's definitely the plan. And so if anyone is interested in collaborating on that level, please do drop us an email.
Well, thank you both so much for your time. Before we part ways, will you let folks know where they can go to check out the Working Class History map and app, and how to follow y'all on social media?
For people who want to go and see the map, it's map.workingclasshistory.com, and see the stories web app, it's stories.workingclasshistory.com.
You can listen to our podcast however you're listening to this podcast, this app, a different one, whatever, or on our website, workingclasshistory.com. And you can connect with us on social media on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, maybe some others that I've forgotten about. Are we on MySpace?
There's a Tumblr renaissance right now. Tumblr is letting people post nudies again, so it's going to be a renaissance again.
Yeah, we did get temporarily banned from Tumblr.
Did you?
Posting alleged nudity, but it wasn't. It was like a picture of a strike in the 40s or something. I don't know what they were thinking, but yeah, we've been keeping it real on Tumblr for some time.
Is it maybe with some of those old, sort of socialist realist kind of, I don't know, like a big muscly shirtless proletarian or something that that kind of triggered the Tumblr spam, I don't know, filter, or spam nudie filter.
That's too funny. Well, we'll be sure to definitely link to all of that stuff on the episode's show notes. Thank you both so much for coming on. I'm really excited for people to get to check this website and digital tool set out, and even more excited for people to be able to go walk around in the world and see these things in real meat space, myself included.
Yeah, man, walking around in the world is cool.
Touching grass, dude, it fucking rocks. Hell yeah. Well, John, Matt, thank you both. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks so much for having us. Always great to chat to you, and see you again in 3 years.
Well, hopefully it's not that long. Cheers, y'all.
Yeah, cheers. Bye.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode with Coffee with Comrades about the new WCH web apps. As a reminder, you can check out the Stories app at stories.workingclasshistory.com and the companion map at map.workingclasshistory.com. As always, we've got links to more info, transcripts and more on the webpage for this episode. Link in the show notes. Again, the Working Class History podcast is only made possible because of support from you, our listeners, on Patreon. So if you can, please consider joining us for as little as $2 a month at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Supporters get great benefits like an exclusive bonus episode with an extra chat we have with Pearson, ad-free episodes, exclusive early access to episodes, free and discounted books and merch and more. If you can't spare the cash, no worries, please just tell your friends about the podcast, share links to episodes on your social media, and take a second to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thanks again to our Patreon supporters for making this podcast possible. Special thanks to Jazz Hands. Thanks also to those of you who contributed to our GoFundMe to fund the development of the web app. Special thanks to Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners for a very generous donation which helped with this work. Our theme tune is Bella Ciao. Thanks for permission to use it from Dischi del Sole. You can buy it or stream it on the links in the show notes. Thanks to Coffee with Comrades for producing this episode. Make sure to check out their podcast and Patreon, links in the show notes. Additional editing by Jesse French. Thanks to all of you for listening. Catch you next time.